All practice pages and other materials for learning cursive are available at my Teachers Pay Teachers store at www.teacherspayteachers.com/store/Ann-Fosnight. Learning Cursive Lesson 28, Lowercase Cursive Review. Lowercase Cursive Review. We're going to look at each of the letters and remember the do's and don'ts for those letters. Lowercase a. We know we want it to touch the baseline and the midline. It's made with a down curve, under curve, slant, under curve. One thing you don't want to do is leave it open. Notice it looks like a C and an I. Lowercase b. It needs to touch the baseline and the headline. And the connector, the bridge, needs to touch at the midline. Make sure you make it big enough. Don't pull that undercurve backwards. Lowercase c. I know I said it a lot. Make sure you keep your curve, your good curve in your C. Don't let it look like it's hanging from the midline to the bottom line. Do make sure it's touching the baseline. Do make sure it's touching the midline, and make sure it has a curve. Lowercase d touches the baseline and the headline. The down curve touches the midline. Keep it closed. Be careful. You don't want it to look like a C and an L, or a C and a T that doesn't have a cross. Lowercase e. Touch the baseline and the midline. Keep a small loop in it. Don't make it too big. Don't go below. Don't make the loop too large. Lowercase f. It's the only three-space lowercase letter. It needs to touch the headline, the descender line, and the baseline. Notice what happens when I make it too small. It starts looking like a B. G. You need to keep it to the midline and the descender line. You need to keep that straight on the slant. Keep it closed. Don't curve it. Keep the loop small. Lowercase h. Notice what happens when you start curving it in. Make sure it's touching the headline and the baseline, and that you don't get a curve when you do your slant under curve. Lowercase I touches the baseline and the midline. It's a straight slant here. Make sure it doesn't have a loop. Put the dot over top. Same with lowercase j. Put the dot over top. Keep that slant straight all the way to the descender line. Cross it at the baseline. Don't let it go crazy. Again with K. Reminds us of H. If we don't make it touch, and it looks just like the H, how do we know which letter it is? Make sure your L touches the baseline and the headline. Don't make it too short. It starts looking like an E. Lowercase m touches the baseline at 4 spots and the midline at 3 spots. Make all the overcurves the same size. Lowercase n touches the baseline at 3 spots and the midline at 2 spots. Don't make it too tall. Do touch the lines. Make the overcurves the same size. Lowercase o. We want to make sure it's closed. This looks like a C and the beginning of an R. We're not sure what it is. Lowercase p. Keep the looped part where it belongs, or it starts looking like an S. We need to be careful with it. Lowercase q touches the midline and the descender line and sits on the baseline. Make sure you close the down curve part. Make sure you close the loop and it touches the descender line. And R needs to be narrow, needs to touch the baseline and the midline. should only have 1 point. S needs to be small, touching the baseline and the midline, should not have a loop or an extra section in there. Lowercase t needs to touch the baseline and the headline. Make sure it's tall enough. Make sure it's straight. Don't put a loop in it. This looks like an L with a cross. Lowercase u touches the baseline at 1, 2, 3 spots and the midline at 2. Make sure that the legs are the same size. Make sure that they are not too far apart from each other. Don't put that extra curve that I was talking about anywhere in your V. Make sure it touches the baseline and the midline. Also with your W, baseline, midline, all of those undercurves need to be the same size and they need to touch the midline. With X, we need to make sure we cross it in the middle. We need to make sure it touches the midline and the baseline. And we don't put a connector on it. I've seen that from many writers. No connectors on X. It's not one of the connector letters. Y, make sure it's touching the midline and the descender line and sitting on the baseline. Make sure the loop is long and straight and thin. And with our Z, we touch the midline and the descender line and sit on the baseline. Make sure you have that little mini overcurve in there. Otherwise, it's hard to tell we have a Z. This practice page goes with the review of all the lowercase letters. You're going to trace each one on its training wheel letter one more time. And then underneath, you're going to write them on the lines. Then you have a few words to write, and then you can make up your own words, words that you would like to write or that your teacher would like you to write to finish the page. Then there's one final review of the lowercase alphabet with all the models up there for you to check out. Remember all the do's and don'ts, and then write the alphabet yourself. Show your very best work, how well you can do it, and then write a sentence. If you need a capital anywhere beyond the first letter, make sure you print the capital. Make sure you print the capital for the first letter of the sentence. Make sure you put a period at the end. Make your sentence long enough that it needs 2 lines. Good luck. I hope you enjoyed learning lowercase cursive. Next, we'll start with capital A.